I'm going to present what I know about SwiftUI. I don't know if everything is correct, but I managed to make a working app, and I'll try it again today. It's very beta. A lot of things are still broken, and we'll see how it goes. I just downloaded the latest beta from Xcode and the latest Catalina updates yesterday, so we'll be using that as well. So let's see. If maybe something goes wrong, we'll see. But I figured it will be fun. So we're going to make a small currency converter. We're going to make an iOS app. This will be small, maybe, to read. Let's see. The font will be bigger in 1 second. We'll see if we can use live preview. If it gets too small, we'll switch to running the application. So let's run it and see if it works, the empty application, and then we'll start building things. Maybe we can resume the live preview. I figured like it works really well these days, so maybe it's different from playgrounds, and it will be actually something we can use, and that will work. So at least the live preview is fast and works. OK, so what we're going to do first is create a struct for our view. So this will be the converter, and it will conform to the view protocol. And the view protocol has one requirement, and that's that we implement a body property. And this can be any view you want, or you can write some view, which is this new feature of Swift, which means a value that conforms to the view protocol. It's a little bit more subtle than that, but we don't have time for that today. And so here we could, for example, create a text that says converter. And now over here we can use that struct. So if we resume this, we should now see converter on the right. OK, yeah, it's very small, but it's there. I don't know if we can try. I will try to scale it. It will look ugly maybe, but at least it's a bit more readable for now. And well, we want to have maybe a vertical stack with, let's say, 100 euro, and then equals, and then 425, and then zloty. So it's beautiful. So I won't focus too much on the design. So you can do a lot of cool stuff, like setting the font to, let's say, title, and here as well. I hope you can see the bottom. I can also make Xcode a little bit less high, maybe. Let's see. Nah. Here we go. Maybe this is better, right, for the people in the back? OK. Zoom this out. OK, so you can do all kinds of stuff with design. Now, what we want is to have a text field instead of a label. So here we want a text field, and it has a slightly different API. So this takes a binding, and a binding is not a normal value. So a binding is basically something that can get and set a value. So this would think of it a little bit like a pointer to some state somewhere. Maybe this is, well, there are different kinds of state, but it's sort of like a pointer to some state that's the source of truth, which holds the text fields. You can do something like this, constant 100, and then let's see if this works. Well, we don't have a keyboard, I guess, in the live preview, but we can try to run it on the device. And now we should be able to type. Let's see, there it is. Huh. OK, so the constant is not the binding we actually want, so we'll ignore it for now. We want to have some data stored where this text field can write to. And there are 3 ways to do that in SwiftUI. There's an environment object, which we will not look at today. It's sort of like dependency injection kind of thing. There's a binding, a state, which is sort of like a property of the view. So if you think of a UI view, it would be a property of the UI view. and then there's a bindable object, and we'll look at that later. So what we want is to have a state var input, which is a string, and we'll start with 100, and we want to use it here. And this looks a little bit like PHP. You write $input, and then it points to a binding. So let's see what happens now. I don't know why it's not displaying anything. This is interesting. So let's maybe set the color to black and set a font to title. This is of course the beta. Maybe it will work now, and maybe it won't. Interesting. There it is. I know what the problem is. It's a scale effect. So this text field becomes really big. It becomes twice as big as the screen now. That's why there's no 100 in there. So now we have something in there. OK. So I guess I'll leave out the scale effect for now. So we can type in here. And what we actually want, and this is the cool part, is when we type euros in here, we want this zloty amount to update. So let's do that. So the first thing we say is the parsed input is an optional double because it might fail. And normally you would write return double input. We can leave out the return. It's also new. And now we get an optional double. And then we want to multiply that by the exchange rate. So we can say output is a string, also optional. And we're going to take the parsed amount and map over it. And then we say $0 times 4.25. That's the exchange rate. And then we want to turn that into a string. So let's do that as well. And now we should be able over here to write outputs or let's say invalid amount. So let's run it and see what happens. OK, so there's at least a .0, and we can type. So we can type any kind of number, and now it updates. And if you think about it, maybe it's a bit boring, but it's also super cool because we didn't have to write any observation code. We did not have to observe the text field. We don't have to write like a delegate or something. This happens automatically. So I'm not completely sure how they implemented this, but from my understanding, what's happening is because we create this binding to a text field, we're setting the input. And because the input is declared here in the view, anytime it changes, this view hierarchy gets re-rendered. And it only changes what's necessary. So I think only this output will actually change below the hood, like the real UI view that's below. And I think that's really powerful. Like the fact that you don't have to worry about this anymore and that it happens automatically is really cool. And we can take this a lot further. So before we do that, let's also think about invalid amounts. So now we have invalid amount. It would be nice to actually have a different view maybe. So we can even do something like this. So we can say if output not equals nil, then we do this. Else we say, let me scroll up a little bit, text invalid amount. And we can indent this and run it again. And what's happening now is if we type, let's say, an A in here, the views don't even get rendered. If we remove the A, they get added back in. So you can really make very dynamic UIs with this. And I think that's super awesome. You can even do stuff like where we take the VStack and say, set the background to be, well, let's say output equals nil. Then we want to have a nil colored red as the background. Otherwise, we want to have nil. And this will not look so pretty, I think. But if we type an A now, we get a red invalid amount. And if we remove the A, it's white again. And of course, I'm not a designer, but you can see how if you work with a designer, you could make this really nice. OK, so this is a start. One thing that would be nice is to use a formatter. So let's quickly do that. So we're going to say formatter is an NSNumber formatter. Or actually, it's called number formatter. Old habits. So we want to have an equals here and call this. This is the boring part of the presentation. So return f, and we set the style to currency. And it's called number style. And we set the currency symbol to empty. And then let's write a quick function. So func formats, input double, return a string. Because it's very annoying to use this formatter today, we have to say formatter.string from NSNumber. I think it used to be different. And we have to unwrap the string. OK, so now here we can say format. And it should look a little bit nicer, the output. So now we have 2 zeros. Yay. So and we have commas and everything. So it's a little bit nicer. Now, we also would like to select a currency. So we don't want to hard code the amount and maybe the currency we're converting from. So that's the next step. We say var exchange rates is going to be a dictionary from string to double. And we're going to have PLN in there, 4.25. And we're going to have GBP, which is 0.89. And now below our text field, we want to have a list. So we can just write lists, and then we write for each. And in here, we can now iterate over all the keys in the dictionary. So we can say exchange rates.keys.sorted, and this sorts them by name. And then we can write, for example, text with the key, and we need that key over here. Let me remove the preview for now. So there is an error here, and the error is this. Does anybody know what I forgot? Anybody pay attention? So it's really stupid because I forgot to write identified by self. This is a way for SwiftUI to know how to identify keys. And the problem is if you forget it, you get a completely different error somewhere else. And this is typical today of SwiftUI and Swift. So it's very unfortunate. And I think if you're trying to write SwiftUI, like you have to really be aware of this. It's the way it is. SwiftUI is still really awesome, but this is not so cool. So let's see what happens if we run this. So now we have a table view below. And yeah, we cannot really do much with it. But what's cool is how you design table view cells. So we can say, for example, HTag, and then we have the text key and a spacer. And then we have another text where we look at the self.exchange rates. We take the key and we unwrap it, and then we can format this actually. And then if we run it now, we also have the exchange rate in there, which is still very static. What we can also do is automatically, if this number changes, we can change what's in the text field. So we can, for example, say, copy this, and now we multiply our exchange rate by, let's say, parsed. And then, of course, if parsed not equals nil. So another problem with SwiftUI is that you cannot write if let in this view syntax. So you cannot write if let p equals parsed. You have to write parsed not equals nil. Maybe one day in the future they add it, but today we have to write it like this. It's very strange. Let's see, there is an error. I'll force unwrap it. And we need to write a self dot here and a self dot here. And now it should run. So this is what it's like, right, to write SwiftUI today. Okay, so we can type, and this also automatically updates, and that's really cool, right? Like this is a lot of work if you wouldn't have SwiftUI. That said, it's not going to solve all your problems, but not having to worry about observing model objects or observing state is really, really powerful. I think in Model View Controller, this is the #1 mistake that we all make. Like we forget to update our UI if the model changes, or we forget to subscribe to models. And here, you cannot make that mistake. We'll have different problems with SwiftUI, but at least that is solved. OK, so this UI is not really cool. I think it should be actually something where we can select a currency and not like a table view that displays it, because normally you only want to see the output in one currency. And that's actually quite easy. So we can write a picker, and here we have to have a selection, a label, and a content. So the selection is going to be a binding to some property, and we will add that over here. So we'll say selection string, and we'll start with PLN. And then in our picker, we can write $selection. We can write a label for, let's say, currency. And then the content is what we had before. So it's for each. And then with no h tag and no spacer, just like this. So let's see what happens if we run it now. OK, there's a mistake somewhere. Yes, thank you. So now we have a picker view, and we can select something. So of course, we now also need to update. So this needs to be extracted into some computed property. So let's say current rate. And we can say current rate, which is the double. And we take the exchange rates. And we know we have a valid key, so we can, again, force and wrap. And of course, over here, we should also use selection as the text. So again, this should automatically work. We have PLN, and then if we change it to GBP, you can see that the amount changed and the label changed. And again, it's automatic. One experimental thing we can try, which I tried today for the first time, is to, instead of a VStack, have a form. So that's new in this beta. And then we can have a section with maybe all of this. Let's see. Put all of this in a section. I'll leave this out for now. And the picker will go in its own section. So let's see. This closes the section. Create a new one. Put the picker in there. Indent this. And I think we should use an h tag for all the fields. So we'll use the text field. I'll remove this for now. OK. So we have our text field. It becomes a bit hard to format your code, I think. We'll see what the style guidelines will do. So let's see if it compiles. We need to wrap this entire thing in a navigation view. So we need to say navigation view in order for the form to work. So try again. OK, so now we have our form. It looks weird with the font sizes. But the cool thing is that the picker we wrote is now one of these pickers. So that's just like they showed in the talk. And it actually works like that. So that's sort of the declarative part of SwiftUI, where based on the context, they can render things very differently. OK, so the next step is to load this data from the network, because it's not so cool that it's hard-coded. And to do that, we have to take a few steps. So the first thing is actually really cool. We can say file Swift packages, add package dependency. And this is now built into Xcode, where we can add a package. I don't know the Wi-Fi code, so I have a local Git repository. But normally, you would type a GitHub URL or something like that in here. So I can drag this in here, say file // the enter button doesn't work. But it's awesome, right? Like now we have a package installed and built into Xcode. So now I imported the tiny networking package, which is this little networking library. So what we're going to do is create a new file where we create something to load data from the network. So I'll call this, let's call it remote value. OK, so here we're going to import SwiftUI. We're going to import Combine. That's Apple's framework for doing the reactive programming. And import tiny networking. And for this networking library, we basically need two things. We need a struct that's codable, and we need a URL. So the data we're going to load, let's see if we can open up Safari and localhost, looks like this. So it's just JSON with some values, and the only thing we're interested in is this rates dictionary, which is a dictionary from string to bool. So the API I used is called Fixer. I'll call this Fixer data. And this has rates, which is a dictionary from string to double. And then the struct needs to be codable. We can also, I guess we can add equatable and hashable. Why not? Right? And we need a URL. So we need this localhost URL. Here we go. And then we can create an endpoint that combines this parsing for the fixer data and the URL. So we can say fixer endpoint equals endpoint fixer data. And we want JSON and we want to get it. And the URL should be the URL we provided above. So that is all we need to do for the networking part. Now we want to create some kind of model object that can load data and then communicate with SwiftUI that the data has loaded. And maybe we can also reload things as well. And that's going to be called remote value. So remote value is a generic class, and it loads some A from the network. And to initialize it, we have to give it an endpoint that knows how to load A's. And we'll store that endpoint over here. So an endpoint of A. And we'll also have a value, which is an optional A. And this value could be a result, but to keep things simple, I'll use optional today. Now, let's store if this endpoint equals endpoint, and then we call reload. And reload is very simple. So in reload, we take the URL session that's shared, and we load. This is also from the tiny networking library. We load our endpoint, and then on complete, we get a result in. We can switch over it. And in case of failure, we set self.value to nil. And here you would store the error, of course. In case of success, we set self.value to x. So that's half of the work done for our endpoint, for our remote value. Now let's try to use it. So back in our content view, we can actually move this outside of the converter, so in the wrapper view. So here we can now say, let's say data equals remote value, and initialize it with our fixer endpoint. And ideally, this would already do the trick, right? Like it should load the value or load that endpoint. And to test that, we'll use a did set. And we can say print value. So let's see what happens. I'll open the console. Yeah, sorry, I forgot one thing. Of course, we have to disable app transport security. So let me add a key here. See, security settings, open it up, allow arbitrary loads, yes. Try it again. And see what our console prints. So here we have all the exchange rates loaded from localhost. And we can try to use that. So over here in our content view, we could now do something like if data.value equals nil, we show the text loading. Otherwise, we show a navigation view. So here we can use the rates. Let's say exchange rates, data.value.rates. If only we had if-let, it'd be so much nicer. So now we have a few problems. The compiler complains about an opaque return type, something, something. The problem is that we're sort of trying to return two different types of values. The one is a text and the other one is a navigation view. And SwiftUI tries to be very typed. And that's why you have problems like this sometimes. Maybe they will fix this in the future. I think there are some ideas for that, but today it's a bit of a problem. My solution seems to be putting a group around it, and that works. I don't know if this is a good practice, but at least it works for now. So it loaded directly, but there's something wrong still with the code. So if we go to our, let's see, where is our object, remote value. We're not really using things in the right way. So let me put a sleep in there over here. Let's say it takes a little while to load things from the network. Now it will display loading forever. It will never get to that different state. And the problem is we don't tell SwiftUI yet how to observe this object. It doesn't happen automatically. We need to tell SwiftUI when something has changed and how to observe that. OK, so let's do that. So the first thing we need to do is go back to our remote object, a remote value. And we need to make this conform to bindable object. So this is if you have an object that you want to be able to observe. So you would do this also for your own model values. And bindable object has one requirement, and that's did change. And this needs to be some kind of publisher. So publisher is something from combine. And the thing that Apple uses all the time in their examples, which I also use because I haven't experimented with combine so much yet, is a pass-through subject. So this is sort of like a reactive thing where you send values in and you get the same values back out. So we want to send optional A's in, and we don't have any error state. So that's the never. We'll initialize it straight away. Now here we can call the change and call send and send in the value. The next step, no. Sorry. The next step is to make sure that we can listen to our remote value. And that's back in our content view. So here we need to now make this an object binding. So before we wrote bindable object, here we write object binding. And it needs to be a var for this to work. And that means that SwiftUI sort of knows that it can watch this thing. OK. So let's see what happens. There's still one mistake. I don't know if anybody knows it already. No one? OK, so let's go back to our remote value, because Swift will point it out for us, or the compiler will point it out. It says we cannot publish changes from the background threads. Just like UIKit, we have to set everything on the main thread. So to do that, we can just do a dispatch queue main.async and then send the value. And of course, now we need self.here and self.here. So now it's loading for a second, and then it displayed. And now we have all the currencies in here. So we can select something else, MOP. And we have a different amount. And you can use the same pattern for all kinds of data loading. So if you have a table view cell, or we call it now, I guess, a list item. If you have a list item, you can also put your remote values in there and load things from the network just for that cell. or for that item. Okay, so our loading indicator is currently just a simple text. So let's make that a little bit nicer. We want to use an activity indicator. And this doesn't exist in SwiftUI yet. At least I didn't find it. So we need to wrap it ourselves. And that's actually surprisingly easy. So we want to make our custom view activity indicator. And instead of conforming to the view protocol directly, we're going to conform to UI view representable. And this wants two methods. So the first one is make UI view. And it has a type here that we need to specify. So this is UI activity indicator view. And this is where we create the view. So we can say let's a equals UI activity indicator view, return it. And then in between we configure it. So we can say start animating. And I think that should be it. Now the second method we need to implement is update UI view. And this is called whenever your state changes. So if you have properties in your struct, state properties, that's when you change those, this update UI view will be called. We don't have any properties, so we can leave it empty for now. And that's really all you need to do. So now we can create a vertical stack here and display an activity indicator. I'll increase the sleep a little bit. Let's do a sleep of 2 and run it again and see what happens. So now we have our little activity indicator. The people in the front can see it, maybe. And that worked. And you can wrap any kind of UI view like this, and you can put as much effort into the wrapping as you want. I wanted to wrap a map kit or an MK map view with some specific properties, and it actually worked really well. It's just a lot of work to wrap everything yourself, but you can do it. OK, so we're almost done. I think one thing that would be cool is to try to see how hard it would be to do the same thing for a Mac project. So let's just create a new project and copy paste everything in and see what happens. So we're going to choose macOS or Cocoa app, and then we choose currency converter 13. So the one thing that should work automatically is our remote value. So the first thing we need to do again is enable arbitrary loads. Yes. We need to add the package, of course. And then we should be able to copy paste everything. Drag it in here. Right. Oh. File. This is now becoming boring because it's so easy. OK. So let's try to drag our remote value in here. So far, so good. And we'll just copy paste all the code from the content view and paste it in. So let's see what happens if we build it. I think there should be a few errors. So the first thing is that it complains about the form. So we don't have form on macOS. So we'll go back to a VStack and see what happens now. Now it's the activity indicator. So we can wrap that. So we can say if OS iOS, else if OS macOS, and if. So we have to create it again, our activity indicator. And this is, of course, almost the same as what we did before. So this is indicator. So this is now an NSView representable. And we have to implement make NSView. And the hardest part is knowing the name of the class. So this is called an NSProgress indicator. But it's the same thing. So we create an I, we return it. We call start animation, nil. And we set the style to spinning. and the update will leave empty. So let's see if it builds now. We don't have a navigation view, so we also need to remove that layer. And now it builds, I think, and runs. It's exciting. Does it run? Oh, there we go. We have a little activity indicator. I'll resize it. Okay, let me add something for that. So here we can now set the frame to be to have. Let's see if we get auto completion. No. I think it's called max width, infinity, and max height. Infinity. See what happens now if we can. Okay, we'll do it differently. Okay, there's still something wrong. This needs to go here. It's great with the large font size. Okay. Almost there. Let's see what happens. Okay, so we can now type and everything updates and it loaded the data from the network. We have our picker view. We can select a different currency and it still works. And this is also really cool. There is a bug here if you scroll. It looks like that. In the back, this is actually wrong. You're not misreading this. And of course, one thing to note is that it doesn't look nice, right? Like it doesn't look like a beautiful Mac app should look. This is something, it's not a magical tool. And I think Apple said that in one of their talks, that it's not that you write the code once and then run it everywhere. But the cool thing is that you learn the pattern once and then you can use it anywhere. So you would still write different SwiftUI code, but there are definitely things from this converter that you could pull out into a shared code base. Yet you have to learn only SwiftUI if you want to write cross-platform code. Okay, so this is all I wanted to show. Maybe some advice if you are thinking of using SwiftUI. I tried it a lot and it's still very broken. It's really cool, but I would definitely recommend against using it today for like production stuff. I would totally recommend it for having fun and building stuff. And I do think it's the future. Not yet, but we have to use it, file lots of bugs, and play around with it. So that's all I have to say. And if you have any questions, I'm very happy to answer them. Thank you.
I have a question. Do you know, is there any, for now, any system to automate the animation of live data by combining?
Yes, we can try that actually. Let's see. So this is back in the iOS app. We should be able inside our. This is the bottom of the VStack. We should be able to say something like transition, and then say, well, let's for example do scale or something like that, and then we can say animation basic. So this tells SwiftUI that when something changes in the view hierarchy, we have to use the scale transition. And by writing animation, it tells that you actually have to animate these changes. So now if we run it, let's see what happens. Well, I guess we're not changing the view hierarchy yet because we're using the form. It animates a little bit now. If you add and insert different elements, it will actually animate that. So this is the basic API for that. You have different kind of transitions and animations, but it's very declarative. So, it's hard to really control your animations. I think I don't know yet how to do that. And in UIKit and AppKit, it's I think much easier to have good control of your animations. But that said, have a lot of APIs for this, and I think the guy who wrote Core Animation, he was one of the presenters on SwiftUI, so he's involved in that. So I guess he knows a lot about animation and did a good job there. So yeah. Any more questions? Yes.
I could write error handling on Bindable object because currently we just skip them.
Yes.
They never occur.
Yes. So the bindable object had this did change requirement, and it needs to be a publisher. And a publisher has the two generic parameters. One is the value, and the other one is the error. And they require that your errors never. So they require you to handle the errors. So if you want to do error handling and display an error to the user, you would still have a never error type in your publisher, but you would change, so over here you would change this maybe to, let's say, result of A and server error, or something you choose. And then when you receive a new value, so in your, over here in your content view, you would say if, well, you would switch over the result. You cannot write switch in SwiftUI view syntax. That's the first thing I tried. It immediately broke. So you really have to then write something on result where you write two computed properties. Is failure, is success, and then use that. But maybe once they add switch, it will actually be nice to do. So that's, I guess, how you would do that.
How is Bindable variable behave after receiving error? It's somehow finished, like observable in RX Swift?
Now, because the error type is never, the bindable object, yeah.
Imagine the case that we have a summer.
Yeah, well, because the type system will now prevent it. So if you're asking, so in SwiftUI, I don't think this could happen, but in Combine, I'm not an expert on this, but so what I understand from Combine is you have, if you subscribed, you have three kinds of messages you can get. So if you start subscribing to some kind of publisher, the first thing you get is, here's a new subscription. And what you then need to do is tell Combine, I want to start the subscription and I can receive this many values. Could be infinite, but you could also say I can only receive 10 values and not more. And then the publisher is not allowed to send you more values than that. Then next you get a possibly infinite amount of events. So that could be, for example, in this case, an A or a server error. And before it would be A or nil. And then at some point, for some streams, you might get, I don't know the name, like a stream closed or ended or something like that message. And you get it once, and then you get no more values. That's how they do it in Combine, as far as I understand. Like I said, I'm no expert. I have just as much experience as you, like almost nothing. So that's how that works, I think. Yeah.
I have a question. You've been writing the styling functions like background or transition or animation. Is there a possibility to write your own, like extend this language with your own?
Yes. So it depends a bit on, well, you can interpret your question and say yes and no. So you can write your own extensions so that you'd say, I don't know, instead of saying background color red, you write my cool style, and it applies those styles in terms of what exists. If you want to do layout things, which you could also consider styling, like if you want to do something like a flow layout or something like that, that's, well, I don't know how to do it. Maybe it's possible. I wouldn't say it's not possible, but I think it's not possible. So you really have to figure out what you want. But it's possible to write view modifiers, and it's kind of interesting. I don't know if we can see the types. Maybe if we write over here, I don't know if this works, but maybe if we write bool, it will tell us exactly the type. Okay, so this is the type of what we wrote. So every styling you apply changes the type. So you can really see that here's like an empty view, and then it uses an environment key modifier, and well, it gets really complicated. And with every method call you make, well, not with almost every method call you make, you change the type. And I think this is also, I would assume this is causing those errors and making Swift a little confused. But then I guess one day they can fix these errors, and hopefully soon, and hopefully things will get a little bit easier. But yeah, what you want to do is it's called some kind of modifier, maybe view modifier or something like that. And I think there's even a tutorial where they show it maybe, but I'm not sure. Yes, it's possible. There was another question in the back, I think. Yes.
Yeah, I had a question. Actually, I have two questions which are related to each other.
Yeah.
Did you encounter any interesting limitation of SwiftUI? And the second question is, where would you specifically recommend against using SwiftUI?
When I would recommend against using SwiftUI?
Except like rewriting stuff.
Yeah, I wouldn't like. Well, when is today, and when is production? You know, when Swift first came out, we immediately made a Mac app in it, and everybody was complaining about it, and everything was broken all the time. But I really liked it. If you think like I'm not going to ship before December, and if you believe that Apple is going to fix everything, by all means start writing a SwiftUI app today. But if you want something that's stable and works, and all of these things, that could take, I don't know, months, years, probably years. But if you like living on the edge, and which I like, like I would do it. Like I wrote a server-side Swift application, which is also a bad idea. It crashes once a week. We don't know why, but I don't mind. Like it's just me and Florian, who run the company, so it's fine. If you work and you have to explain it to your boss or to your customers, it's a different story. So I cannot give you concrete advice except for be cautious, and probably it's a bad idea unless you want to have fun. What was the first question again? Sorry.
Did you encounter any interesting problems and limitations?
Yeah. I only encounter this is this is the stuff that works, and that's why I show it to you. So one of the things is the identified by self. That doesn't work. I can try to show some things. So here I have a few example apps. Let's see my to-do list. So one of the things is that not everything updates automatically all the time. There are still some bugs there. So this is a to-do list, and here I have this is my list table view controller, and then I have the to-dos. And if I tap this, it doesn't update. It actually changed the value, because if we go back, you can see that there's a check mark, and it doesn't update. So the moment you start using navigation controllers inside the navigation controller, things break. I think it's a bug. I hope it's a bug, because otherwise there will be a lot of people who are going to be very confused about this. The code is very plain, and so it works. It should work, I think. Another thing is I tried to make let's see, where's my Swift talk? Here we go. So I tried to make something where I have a table view with a cell that has multiple lines. Now it works. Okay, great. That's new. That's great. It didn't work actually in this very beta yesterday. Well, this is awesome. Okay. So that didn't work. Well, they fixed it. There were some problems with images and stuff like that. What else? Animations, like I said, are a little bit hard. So here I have another example of an activity indicator. And this is also maybe me not understanding SwiftUI, but I tried to ask the SwiftUI people, and they confirmed that my thinking was right. So maybe you can see it at the back, it animates. The animation curve is wrong, so don't focus on that. The way I got this to animate is, well, the way you get anything to animate, you have to write this animation that we wrote before. And this will only start when the model changes. So in order to start an animation, and for an activity indicator, of course it needs to be always spinning, you need to change it, which is, I think, a little stupid. And the way I did it is by creating a timer. So yeah, that feels wrong. And I don't know how to, if it's my misunderstanding or if it's a problem. Another problem with SwiftUI is if we open up the developer documentation. So here, for example, we have text. This is the documentation. There are lots of methods. It's hard to know what's exactly there for text fields. So the interesting thing is, let's go back to our currency converter. So what you can do is, here we have a bunch of text labels, right? So we can actually set the foreground color to red and do this on the H stack. And what that will do is sort of change the environment of the H stack, and then all the nested text fields will inherit, or the text views will inherit this. So any view has or every view has a super complicated API. There are just so many things, and it's not necessarily something that works only on a view. It also works on the child views, or maybe it only works on the child views. So yeah, that's sort of complicated. Yeah, and I guess, well, the biggest problem is the lack of documentation. And what I told you, I think, is correct, and it's based on my understanding, but there is no overall documentation except for some API documentation and the WWC videos. But once you try to make your own things, you'll have a lot of questions, and they're not answered in those videos. So that's a huge challenge. We need lots of more documentation, and ideally by the people who made it, because I mean, I can write stuff, but I don't know. Like, I'm just guessing and hoping it's true. And I can verify what I know, but I never know if it's true. You know, I can never prove it unless I have the implementation, and yeah. So that's another huge challenge. Yeah. Yes.
When you are doing server-side scripting, can you use SwiftUI to rendering the output?
No, but so this syntax is called, or I forgot the name exactly. Function builders, thank you. And you can use the same syntax if you want to, for example, to render HTML. And you could even probably simulate something with state, or use your own reactive framework to have like dynamic data and re-render things on demand.
I'm talking about most likely SQL things, not solid pages, static pages, not like a dynamic content.
Yeah. Yeah, so you could use the syntax if you want to, but it's a very bad idea if you use any of the features of Swift, because, like I said, if let doesn't work. You cannot write if case. You cannot write switch. You cannot even, like in here, you could not even write something like let foo equals, or well, you could maybe do it there, but then not here. You cannot write let foo equals hi, like stuff like that. There's so many limitations to the syntax that it's probably easier to write your own syntax and just deal with the extra commas and square brackets for arrays. Any more? Yes?
I remember you've been working on the incremental framework, which is a little bit similar in a lot of ideas. How do you compare your ideas in your work to SwiftUI?
Yeah, so the incremental stuff that I did is, well, first of all, it's mainly made by me, so it's very small, which means like it's easy to understand, but it doesn't do much. SwiftUI does a lot of things, like it's way more than just the reactive updates. So SwiftUI is way more complete. It's supported by a huge team at Apple, I think. Well, I hope it's a huge team. And so what I did is basically, I think, a nicer way to work with UIKit. And what Apple did is really change the paradigm. But there are some similar problems. So if you want to have, for example, how do I explain this? So I can explain it to you afterwards. I don't want to waste everybody's time by thinking of the right explanation. But it's simple in one way, or it's similar in one way, and very different in another. I wouldn't say, I would say what Apple did is a lot better and more awesome than what I did. Yeah.
I have one more.
Yeah.
Do you think that you can use SwiftUI with any app architecture? Is it like architecture agnostic, or is it really like preferring one architecture over the other?
Yeah, so you can notice that we didn't write any controller. We only wrote view code and model code. So I would say the remote value is model code. There's no controllers in SwiftUI. It's gone. And so that's already a huge change, right? Like it's MV. And so it will be interesting. I guess there are lots of possible architectures for SwiftUI. So one thing you could do instead of writing structs is you could write something like a func converter, which takes some inputs and returns you some view. And this is totally like this, right? Like it's totally possible to do this kind of style. And I think it will look very different from structs. The way you structure your model data is also very open to whatever you want. So you could have one huge struct with your entire model data in it, or you could say, I have lots of little objects, which are all their own bindable objects. So one is more like Elm, and the other one is more like Coco MVC. And yeah, I think it will be very interesting to look at what people come up with, because everybody's just messing around. There's not very much guidance yet, so I'm guessing lots of people will have different architectures, and it will be lots of fun to see in a few years what kind of things people come up with. But other parts of architectures are solved for you. Like the whole observation and stuff. That's now, when it works, it's easy. If they fix all the bugs, yeah. So I don't know. Like I'm excited to see what kind of stuff comes out. I'm guessing it's going to be different from MVC and MVVM, and other people say no, it's totally possible to still write that. We'll see. Okay, thank you.